Book summary: The Fate of the Day by Rick Atkinson. In The Fate of the Day, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Rick Atkinson returns with the second volume of his Revolution Trilogy, chronicling the harrowing middle years of the American War of Independence. Picking up where the British are coming left off, this installment captures the period from early 1777 through 1780, stretch defined by exhaustion, desperation, and an escalating glow. Conflict. Atkinson's meticulous research, compelling prose, and deep humanity bring the American Revolution vividly to life, balancing battlefield drama with political intrigue, international diplomacy, and the everyday sacrifices of fledgling nation. 1. A Revolution Under Siege, early 1777. The opening chapters plunge us into the bleak aftermath of the first 21 months of the Revolution. The American forces, having scraped through battles at Lexington, Concord, Trenton, and Princeton, are bloodied and reeling. The Continental Army is underfed, poorly clothed, and facing both formidable British military and internal disarray. George Washington, their reluctant but tenacious commander-in-chief, understands that morale and unity are as critical as muskets and gunpowder. By winter 1777, Washington's ragtag army is battered but still intact. Their narrow escapes have only reinforced British perceptions of eventual victory. However, beneath the surface, the British campaign begins to fray. King George Romer remains resolute in his desire to subdue the rebellious colonies, yet the logistics of waging war 3,000 miles from London and the potential for European intervention cast growing shadow over imperial strategy. Atkinson opens this act of the war with an emphasis on uncertainty. No side holds the upper hand, and the path to independence is riddled with political, military, and ideological landmines. 2. France, Franklin, and the Fate of the War. One of the narrative's most compelling threads follows Benjamin Franklin in Paris. With unmatched wit, cultural dexterity, and political calculation, Franklin becomes the Revolution's most effective diplomat. Atkinson's portrayal of Franklin is nuanced, part statesman, part showman, who deftly navigates the salons and royal courts of France while concealing the dire state of the American war effort. Franklin's courtship of the French culminates in one of the war's most consequential developments, the 1778 Franco-American alliance. The French monarchy, seeing an opportunity to weaken its traditional rival Britain, agrees to provide military, money, and eventually naval support. Atkinson underscores how this alliance transforms the revolution from colonial rebellion into full-scale international war. Simultaneously, Spain's growing animosity toward Britain brings it into the conflict as an adversary, further stretching British resources. Atkinson expands the scope of the book beyond American shores, exploring campaigns in the Caribbean, India, and the Mediterranean, where imperial rivalries play out in blood and treasure. 3. The British Campaign, Stalemates and Setbacks. Back in North America, General William Howe continues to command British forces, despite early victories, including the capture of Philadelphia in September 1777. Howe's strategy suffers from lack of coordination and long-term vision. He defeats Washington at Brandywine and Germantown, but fails to deliver a decisive blow. Atkinson captures the psychological and political pressures weighing on Howe, his frustrations with command, the lack of clarity from London, and his awareness of growing American resilience gnaw at his confidence. Eventually, Howe resigns and is replaced by Sir Henry Clinton, who inherits both demoralized force and strategic quagmire. Meanwhile, in upstate New York, British General John Burgoyne's attempt to split the colonies with three-pronged campaign results. Disaster. His surrender at Saratoga in October 1777 becomes turning point in the war and major diplomatic victory for the Americans. Atkinson's treatment of Saratoga is dynamic and thorough, detailing not only the battlefield tactics but the feuding among American commanders, especially the valor and volatility of Benedict Arnold. Saratoga convinces France that the Americans can win, and that the risk of war with Britain is worth taking. 4. Valley Forge and the Spirit of Endurance. The winter of 1777-78 at Valley Forge is perhaps the most iconic chapter of American endurance. Atkinson devotes significant time to exploring the physical and psychological torment endured by Washington's men. The camp becomes a crucible of transformation. With little food, inadequate shelter, and rampant disease, the Continental Army nearly collapses. Enter Baron Friedrich von Steuben, former Prussian officer whose discipline and charisma galvanized the troops. His drills and reforms turned citizen soldiers into professionals. Atkinson credits von Steuben with establishing the foundation of the modern U.S. Army. Washington's own leadership evolves in these dark months. Once aloof and cautious, he becomes more engaged and deeply invested in his men's well-being. letters to Congress reveal his desperation and his dawning realization that victory requires not only battlefield triumphs but the support of functioning government, something the fledgling Congress struggles to provide. Atkinson also gives space to the unsung heroes, camp followers, nurses, and enslaved people who sustained the Army at its lowest point. Valley Forge, under his lens, becomes more than a location. It becomes tests of character and commitment. 5. Monmouth, Charleston, and Southern shifts. As the Army emerges from Valley Forge, newly hardened and cohesive, Washington marches against Clinton's retreating forces in New Jersey. The Battle of Monmouth in June 1778 is testament to the Army's improved capabilities. Though the battle ends inconclusively, it proves the Continental Army can now fight the British toe-to-toe. Washington's leadership during the battle cements his authority. Even internal rivalries, especially with Charles Lee, create tension. The British now pivot southward. Believing the southern colonies to be more loyalist-friendly, they target Georgia and the Carolinas. Charleston falls in 1780, dealing major blow to the American cause. Atkinson details this campaign with vivid, often brutal descriptions. Guerrilla warfare erupts in the swamps and backcountry led by figures like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. The South becomes region of civil war, neighbor fighting neighbor. Despite these setbacks, Atkinson shows that American resilience deepens while Congress flounders. Local militias and partisan fighters adapt, using hit-and-run tactics to exhaust British resources. 6. Fractures in the Revolution. The Revolution's internal fractures emerge more starkly in these years. Congress is broke, factional, and often disconnected from the battlefield. Soldiers mutiny over back pay. Inflation devalues the continental currency. States clash over the allocation of men and supplies. The vision of unity forged in 1776 begins to splinter under the weight of war. Atkinson uses these chapters to interrogate the social dynamics of the Revolution. African Americans serve on both sides, some as freemen seeking liberty, others as slaves promised freedom by the British. Native American tribes, such as the Iroquois Confederacy, fracture over alliances with devastating consequences. Women step into roles as heads of households, economic managers, and even battlefield participants, though their sacrifices often go unrecognized. The revolution, Atkinson makes clear, is not clean or uniform. Struggle, it is messy, contradictory, and constantly renegotiated on the ground. 7. Benedict Arnold and the limits of idealism. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of betrayal comes with Benedict Arnold's treason. Once hero at Saratoga, Arnold grows embittered by slights, debts, and his perceived lack of recognition. His plot to surrender the fort at West Point to the British, and his subsequent flight, shocks the nation. Atkinson's account of Arnold is both critical and empathetic. He portrays Arnold as a brilliant but deeply flawed man whose defection forces Americans to confront the limits of revolutionary idealism. If someone like Arnold can betray the cause, who else might? This episode also highlights Washington's deepening understanding of leadership, not just his strategy, but his moral persuasion. He quells the fallout, reaffirms loyalty among his officers, and prepares for the war's next stage. 8. Toward Yorktown, the end in sight. As the book draws to close, the revolution enters its final phase. Though the climactic siege of Yorktown is left for the trilogy's third volume, Atkinson lays its groundwork. The Franco-American alliance begins coordinated campaigns. The British, overextended and overstretched, struggle to maintain their grip in North America while defending their global empire. Still, nothing is certain. Washington continues to lobby more support, and the soldiers remain underpaid and underfed. Yet there is growing sense among generals, civilians, and foreign observers that the tide has turned. The American experiment, once thought doomed, is proving both viable and resilient. Conclusion: what democracy demands. In The Fate of the Day, Rick Atkinson achieves something remarkable. Sweeping narrative that never loses sight of the individual human experiences. At its core, his account is deeply researched, but never historically precise, but emotionally resonant. He shows the American Revolution not as linear march to victory, but as prolonged, uncertain, and often brutal struggle. Test not only of armies, but of ideals. Time to align with the 250th anniversary of the Revolution. This book resonates powerfully in today's world. Atkinson reminds us that democracy is not granted but earned through sacrifice, cooperation, dissent, and determination. The middle years of the Revolution were neither glorious nor inevitable, but they were transformative. Out of suffering, setbacks, and small victories came the foundation of something enduring. The Fate of the Day is narrative history at its finest. Absorbing, enlightening, and essential reading for anyone who seeks to understand not just what happened, but
what it costs, and white still matters.